Good evening, everyone. We'd like to welcome you this evening to the next part in our Jewish Impact series. Tonight, we are truly honored and delighted to be able to welcome somebody who is known as a star in Israel. He's the International Director of Gesher, Mr. Sussman, an organization that builds a cohesive Israeli society and a more united Jewish people by embracing the vibrancy, diversity, and the shared heritage of the Jewish people. Before joining Gesher, JJ worked in the Israeli high-tech sector at firms and companies including Jerusalem Global, SanDisk, Israel Seed Partners, M Systems, and many others. And more importantly, one of JJ's claims to fame is that we actually learnt together in yeshiva. Good evening, JJ.
Can you hear me? Great to be here.
How are you?
Good. I noticed you said we learned together in yeshiva. I like to say we were in yeshiva together. Like nuance.
So there's parts of my my vocation which are hard graft, and this should be one of the most pleasurable, easy moments of my entire year interviewing you, a dear friend. We go way back, and I have to say on a personal level that we always knew that you were destined to be a leader. We used to call you the mayor of Gush because of your outstanding leadership qualities. You were known as an inspiration and role model even back then. But before we go any further, I want to take you back, JJ. Tell us a bit about yourself. And welcome to London, by the way. And we'd like to know a bit about your background, where you grew up, try and understand where you come from and what brought you to what you're doing today. Tell us a bit about your background.
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me. It's really great to be here. It's so bright in London. I don't even feel the rain. As you can tell, I don't have much of an Israeli accent. I grew up in New York City and went to Yeshiva University and then came to study together with you in Israel and then served in the Israeli army. And soon after I finished at Yeshiva University, I came back to work in the Israeli high-tech sector and spent about 17 years or so in the Israeli high-tech sector. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to make a change in my career and decided to jump to the other side and work professionally in the Jewish community, which I've been doing now at Gesher for the past almost 6 years. I'm married to Eliza and have 6 beautiful children. We live here in Modi'in in Israel. And I'd love to welcome all of you here in Israel. As soon as the skies open, you can come back and visit, just like you're welcoming me so nicely here in Woodside Park.
Thank you, JJ. So tell us, we mentioned already that you had leadership qualities even at the tender age of 18. Is leadership something that's always been in your family, from your parents, from your grandparents? Was this a gene that was always been there? Or is it something that just, you found?
You're making me blush every time you talk about these incredible qualities that you noticed within me. I'd love to say that I noticed the same qualities within you when we were in yeshiva together. But yeah, my family has been very involved in the Jewish community. I grew up in a family. My mother was one of 7, and 5 of her, growing up in New York, and 5 of her siblings actually moved to Israel. And each one of them, and my father as well, our entire family has always been very involved in the community. And it's a trait, even when I was working in high tech, and I think that's something that maybe we'll get to later in the conversation. But even as I was working in high tech, I was very involved in helping to build up our community here in Modi'in, very involved in starting the shul, which has become really a center of the community with about 250, 300 members now in the shul and the local school. And that was always on the side, I would say, as I was working in the high-tech sector, and before I made the shift full-time to work at Gesher.
Tell us, JJ, a bit about your work and how you came to Gesher, because there are many areas that a person can involve themselves in community. You mentioned already about synagogue, shul, bet knesset. There's so many different areas and spheres of life, especially in Israel. What made you be drawn to Gesher? And perhaps you'd like to explain what Gesher is all about.
I got to do that also, huh? That's a great question. First of all, Gesher is an organization, as you mentioned earlier, which strives to bring together the different sectors of the Jewish people. The only force that's brought us down as a people, if you go back in history, has been internal strife. There's been no external force that has succeeded in taking us down as a united people. And I think that the word united is a very important word. If we can strive to build a unified Jewish people, there's really nothing that can tear us apart. On a personal level, that's always something I've been enamored with, the Jewish people. I love the Jewish people, and I've always wanted to do something on behalf of the Jewish people. But I think if I harken back and think what really pushed me over the edge to go into this full time, there's just so much ignorance. We're very good at building up walls and creating these stereotypes in our heads that I believe, at least, is based on a lot of ignorance of not knowing the other. And I remember very clearly when I worked at SanDisk, you mentioned, which is obviously a worldwide technology company focused on flash drives. This is probably back in 2008 or 9. And I shared an office with a secular Israeli woman around my age. We both had young children at the time. And it was close to Rosh Hashanah. And we were about to have a few days off from work for Rosh Hashanah. And she turned to me as I'm getting ready to leave the office. I lived in Modi'in and she lived in Rishon LeZion, not too far away. And she said, why don't we get the kids together? Why don't you come visit me over the vacation? And I said to her, we religious people spend most of our day in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah. And I thought that would end the conversation. But she says, no, not the first day, on the second day. Why didn't you come over? And I realized that it's really this ignorance, unfortunately, which exists even amongst people you think would know more, that leads to just a lack of wanting to get closer and get to know our own family. So I think that's really what pushed me over the edge to work for Gesher. And then the way that things evolved, obviously a lot of hashgacha pratit, a lot of divine providence one thing led to another. But Gesher was working on an incredible program called Unity Day, which was the first anniversary of when the 3 boys were kidnapped and ultimately murdered back in 2015. And Gesher was looking to run programming in the diaspora, in addition to the programming they were running here in Israel, because of the incredible love that the families felt from Jewish communities around the world. And it was all happening very quickly, and I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to be able to head that effort in expanding the Unity Day activities in its early years to diaspora communities. And obviously then I was exposed much more to a lot of the programming that Gesher does and jumped in with 2 feet.
Sounds fantastic. Really very special. So Gesher is primarily working in Israel, or is it also building a bridge outside of Israel?
So Gesher is an organization that's been around for decades, and it really was started as an Israeli organization, it still is, to bridge the gap between the religious and the secular here in Israel. I would say recently, in the last 7 or 8 years, we've expanded in 2 ways. One is we've incorporated programming to bridge the gap between the Haredi sector in Israel and the rest of Israeli society, to build that bridge, because it's one that, as recent events have proven, needs a lot of building and fortifying. In addition to building a bridge between Israel and diaspora Jewry. We have so much to learn here in Israel from vibrant and inspirational Jewish communities around the world, like your own community. And I think there's what to learn from Israeli communities and Israelis in the diaspora. So we're working very much on building that bridge as well over the last few years.
Very nice. What would you say is your proudest moment working for Gesher to date? Tell us about some
before tonight
or something. Yeah, up to today. Tell me something that's happened.
Wow, that's a great question. My proudest moment, I'll tell you, it's not even a proudest moment. I think I'm blessed to work at an organization. We all hear the news and we see mass protests or mass funerals, and the press is very good at showing us the negative stories that come out of Israel. I'm an optimist, and I'm blessed to really see the optimistic stories and work with other optimists. So a great example is we have the Gesher Leadership Institute, where we take in groups of 15 to 20 leaders in Israeli society, whether they be mayors or senior journalists or director generals of ministries, on a course for a few weeks, which includes also a trip outside of Israel. And when you take Israelis outside of Israel, all of the labels fall off, and they all of a sudden become friends, even, or certainly Israelis. So when they meet somebody in this group in particular went to Los Angeles, and when you meet a Jew in Los Angeles, and that Jew is frustrated with Israelis, all of a sudden the ultra-Orthodox man and the secular woman who are on the same trip recognize they're talking to both of us in the same way. You know, we're not in our boxes anymore. We're all Israelis, and maybe we should begin to talk to one another and figure out how to deal with these issues. So there was this case where Shai, who was a secular journalist for Channel 2, the number one, now it's Channel 12, television station here in Israel, and Yitzchak, a Haredi editor of one of the largest newspapers in the ultra-Orthodox community, we paired them up to go to Friday night dinner, Shabbat dinner, in people's homes. And they went out for dinner and they came back. When they came back, you know, we all gathered together in the hotel lobby to share stories about what happened at dinner. And I'll never forget this. Shai comes back, the secular guy, and he's tearing. He's literally tearing. And you know, it gets to his turn to share his story. And he says, you know, obviously I'm against a lot of what the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel stands for, or how they act. But here I am sitting with my friend Yitzchak, who now has become really a close friend over these last 5 days. My English is better than his. Yitzchak can't really speak a good English. So we talk about all the issues with our hosts, and they start asking about all the hot button issues in Israel. And it got to serving in the army. And I explained my position, how I served in the army, how my children are going to serve in the army. And then they asked Yitzchak, you know, what about him? And he asked if I could translate for him so that the hosts could understand, Shai said. Mm-hmm. So Yitzchak, you know, he says the Haredi position about how they view the primacy of learning and how that protects, you know, Israel. And obviously they're serving the country maybe in different ways. But the words are coming out of Shai's mouth in English. And it's the first time he's had to have these words be presented as if he were almost speaking, or certainly he was the conduit through which the words came out. And he said, I never gained an appreciation for the entirety of their stance on this issue. Now, I don't agree with it. As a matter of fact, I vehemently disagree with it. But finally, I can appreciate where they're coming from. And I can talk to them, and I can understand, and I can argue. And I think the biggest quality he said was we have to learn how to disagree agreeably. And that hasn't left me. That was in 2016. But it hasn't not only left me, they came back to Israel. And these two families now are great friends. Yitzchak hosted Shai and his family for Shabbat. Wow. And they continue talking. Even as recently as 2 weeks ago, the WhatsApp group of this particular group was talking about the issues that are percolating now between the Haredi community and the rest of Israel and how we can solve them together. So it's those kinds of stories which I think inspire me to do the, as you said, the inspirational work or impactful work that Gesher is really all about.
Unbelievable. JJ, I just want to focus on one particular point. I don't know if you've been keeping up to date with what's been going on in Northwest London and in Anglo Jewry, but there are many striking similarities between the stories that have, the unfortunate stories that have made the press here and the ones that have made headlines in Israel. Here we've had very public, well, they've been made public, weddings by members of the Haredi Stamford Hill community, which have been caught and been in all the newspapers and the tabloids. And this type of thing, of course, creates tremendous animosity. One of the things that strikes me is that if you look at the way the communities are set up, it seems to be almost segregation. If you ever look at in London and if you ever look at in Israel, it's a similar type of thing. And I'm wondering if you've thought or considered this in terms of, you know, we have, that's a religious neighborhood, that's an irreligious neighborhood, there's a Chiloni neighborhood. Clearly, I mean, that can't help matters. What do you think?
So first of all, I don't want to sweep any problems under the carpet that are real problems. And obviously, I think in today's day and age, making large weddings irresponsibly, no matter what community is doing it, is a real problem that needs to be dealt with. But as you said, I think there are certainly megaphones that are exacerbating problems or bringing to light some animosities that are just stereotypical hatred from both sides, which is unfortunate. And I think you see it in how a lot of these, in the beginning of this whole pandemic, it was every single article that had to do with the rise of numbers in COVID cases had a picture here of a Haredi community, even if it had nothing to do with the Haredi community. But there are real issues that can't be denied and have to be dealt with. And that's why I think you mentioned leadership is so key here. We need new leaders to come up to be able to deal with these issues responsibly and sensibly. But in order to do that, we need to create the conduits of conversation to happen between the different sectors of the Jewish people. And I think, unfortunately, that's also been dented over this last year. Our tagline in English is "Be different, but be together." Whereas in Hebrew, we actually have a slightly different tagline. It's "Lahakir, lipagesh, v'lechabed," to get to know, to meet, and to respect. And I think, if anything, this last year has proven is that meeting has become very challenging. And as people meet face to face less and less, you see these issues rise higher and higher. And I think we need to do whatever we can. Meetings such as this between me and you have to continue to happen, tenfold. Not me and you, I don't think is a big deal, but between the different communities. Because if you don't know the other side, all of a sudden they're really the other. And then you develop this baseless hatred, which is, again, the only thing that's really torn us apart. And I think we need to continue meeting and meeting and meeting.
So on that train of thought, the question really is, and I'm wondering if you have an
serious conversation. I've never had such a serious conversation with you.
I told you, listen, we'll do the joking afterwards. We're old friends, but I want to have, for me, it's a rare opportunity to have a real conversation about something that really is close to your heart and my heart. Here's the thing, JJ, how does it work? I don't know if you've got an actual strategy in Gesher, but is it that you tell both sides, let's focus on the commonality and for the time being, ignore the differences? Or do we start looking at the differences before we actually look at the commonality? Which way around do you do it, or is it just happen by itself? How do you make it work?
No, I think whenever you're meeting somebody new, you first have to meet the person as a person and get to know them as a person. Once you know them as a person and established this friendship, then I think you can attack the issues. I think we've always spoken about dealing with the 80% we agree about and pushing aside the 20% we don't agree about. I'm not a fan of that. I think if we're close enough and we get to know one another, we can also talk about the 20% that we don't agree about. And frankly, I think it may even be more than 20%. And certainly, if you look at Israel, I mean, nobody's going anywhere. The Haredi community is staying where they are. The rest of Israel is staying where they are. And we're going to have to learn how to be within this one tiny state and learn how to live with one another. We were involved, the Gesher Film Fund, which started a long time ago within Gesher. It's now its own organization. Were the initial backers of Shtisel, which in Israel just finished their third season. So I was fortunate enough to travel with the actors and the writers when they were first doing those behind the scenes events in Los Angeles. The first one that happened, I think, was in Los Angeles, and I ran that one. I was the moderator for that one, or put the whole thing together. And I recall we had 2 nights there with all of the actors, and obviously it was a worldwide hit, and everyone loved the show. Finally showed, gave you a peek into something that we didn't know much about, and made Haredim human. But the line, I remember one of the leaders in the Los Angeles Jewish community came over to me after the first night, and he said in LA, he's never seen such a cross-section of Los Angeles Jewry gathered together in the same room. And it had to take this show developed in Israel in order to bring these people together to even be in the same room. And I think that's so unfortunate. We have such an opportunity to get to know people and to do great things together. We're not that many people. We're 16 million people around the world. We're not that many. We can't afford to cut any part of it off.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it's interesting because you spoke about getting people in the same space. Gil, my wife, as you know, is from Antwerp. And in Antwerp, it's a very different dynamic. They all live in the same area. They all work in the diamond bourse together. Haredi, Chiloni, it doesn't matter. Sfardi, Ashkenazi, everyone is, mingling and mixing together. And as a result of that, a lot of the misunderstandings and assumptions and labels and stereotypes don't really manifest themselves in the same way as other places. So,
I think the pandemic, we talk about all the negative stuff about the pandemic. I think one of the incredible positive things that's come out of this is these kinds of conversations I'm able to have with you. I'm able to jump in from Modi'in into your community, and we can 100%. Learn from what they're doing in Antwerp and gain from that. And I think it's such 100%. A great opportunity.
100%. But it's interesting, don't you think, that, Shtizzle was seen as, everyone loves Shtizzle. Everyone loves the characters of Shtizzle. And then you ask the same people, well, what do you think of, Yankel down the... Now, Yankel, I can't stand him. I can't stand him. The people in real life, we find them irritating, annoying, or we don't get on with them if they're different to ourselves. But Shtizzle was this love affair. How do you explain that, JJ?
I could talk about what I counted here. First of all, you're right. It's a natural tendency of people to live their own lives and not pay attention to what's around them. But we had a program to try to get corporations here in Israel to look at employing Haredi citizens here in Israel. And I remember I met with the HR manager at a large high-tech company here in Israel, a secular woman from a kibbutz up north. And I was talking to her about the programs we were running to sensitize Haredim on the one hand and employers on the other hand, so that people can hire them, because I think that's another great avenue to integrate or to get people to get to know one another. And she said, okay, I hear what you're saying, I'm in, but listen, maybe you can bring me people like Kiva and not like Shulum Shtisel. So whereas you're right, it did allow them to start benchmarking different, recognize that they're not all the same. There are different types of people in every community. And I think, we keep on being pulled back into the Haredi community, but it's no different between the Kippah Sruga or the modern Orthodox community and the secular community. We all have these built-up stereotypes because we don't know the other. And I think the more we get out there and talk to and see people as people, the more we can really make progress and really fulfill our mission as we read recently, become a Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, right? To really make God's name so holy and sacred here down in this world.
100%. So my question to you is, are we winning or are we losing this battle?
Finally,
can you see progress?
So somebody asked me, somebody I used to work with in the high-tech world came over to me and asked me, how is it working in the work that you do? So I said, look, one thing's for sure, there's always going to be a demand for my services, because I don't know if we're ever going to be able to fully solve the issue of creating Jewish unity. I think, look, like I said earlier, I'm thankfully exposed to the positive stories that are happening and less exposed to the negative stories or don't want to hear the negative stories. I don't think we have a choice. I don't think we can give up. So I think every single person that we can bring onto our side who sees this as a virtue, who sees this as something they want to value, is a win. And I think the more and more people who can recognize that Jewish unity is the most important thing, it says in Pirkei Avot, Ehovet HaBriyot, before Mikarvan LaTorah. First, you have to love every single other person before you have to bring them closer to Torah. So if we can't even get to that first step of loving other people, so where are we? I think we all need to work on that, and it's hard. It's not easy. It's hard work, but I think we don't have the privilege to not try.
Those that need to hear this message, are they willing to be a part of your programs? Is there a willingness on their part?
Well, first of all, I'm speaking loudly so my kids in my house can hear me.
100%. 100%.
But it's a great question. I think, when we started working with, I told you, we expanded our services to work with the diaspora and to work with the Haredi community. I think that was a big question we had for ourselves. Would Haredim come to our programs? We were very successful at bringing leaders in the secular and the religious Zionist community to our programs. Would we be successful in penetrating that community to bring people there? And the answer is, we started slowly, carefully. We took people who already had kind of one foot either in academia or in the employment world or in the media. And one by one, leaders from that community joined. And now we keep on getting deeper and deeper into the community because I think, if you treat people as people and treat them with respect and don't try to change them. That was another thing we said to ourselves. Yeah. If one Haredi comes into our program and comes out not Haredi, we failed. That's not the goal. The goal is to be able to see one another as people and to give them the respect. And again, to learn how to disagree agreeably or respectfully.
And what type of experiences do you put on so that they can have this joint camaraderie between the two sides?
I've spent a lot of time talking about the work we're doing with leaders at that level, which is incredibly important. We have a whole slew of programming, which actually begins with high school kids. One of our historically popular programs is to bring together a secular and a religious high school for a weekend seminar.
Right.
And that's still going on today to get young, impressionable high school students, 11th and 12th graders, 17-year-olds, when they're very impressionable, when they're about to go into the army here in Israel, and they think they know everything, and again, the other is worthless and knows nothing. All of a sudden, they come into these programs on a Thursday, and they think that all the truth sits with them on both sides. And by Sunday, they realize, wow, the other side has, that kibbutznik, he doesn't really hate Israel. He doesn't really hate Judaism. He's a good guy. He's got values himself. And the other people say, wow, those settlers, they don't really have horns. It's not like every single one of them is, beats people up. Wow, he's a good guy. And they become friends. And I think the more and more we get to these kinds of people through the educational system or through informal education, which is what we do. Early on, we had a program that ran for over 15 years in the Israeli army with officers, which was kind of the first almost melting pot in Israeli society, where people come from all different sectors, almost all different sectors of society. And that's definitely a filter for future leadership. So if we can affect those people at the crucial stages in their life, I think that's a great opportunity to really affect the future of the Jewish people, frankly.
Very nice. Very nice. If you have any questions to our viewers, now is the time to put them in the chat box, and then we'll share them with JJ this evening. What message, JJ, would you have for young professionals that are looking to get involved in communal work and have a Jewish impact? What message would you say? What is it that got you involved, and what is it that should motivate them to get involved in the Jewish community and the Jewish people?
I think the answer is to do it. I'll harken back to a quote. I forgot who it was. Maybe Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a little bit of a crass speaker in the high tech world, but incredibly motivational. And he shares all his secrets in every talk he gives. And somebody asked him why. Because he knows out of the 100 people sitting in the room, only about 4 or 5 of the people there are actually going to get up after the talk and do what he says. And I think we all suffer from, well, maybe somebody else is doing it. Let's let somebody else do it. I think the answer is we all have to get up and do it, and we can't afford not to. Again, while I was working in high tech, I wanted to get involved in my community and was very instrumental in building a shul in Modi'in, which has become, I think, the largest shul in the city now. Very involved in starting a school, and there's so many reasons not to. But I think we have to look for the reasons to say yes, not to say no. And only in that way can we make the world a better place, not just for the Jewish community, but for the entire world.
Finally, can I ask you, part one, JJ, what would be, when you're doing anything, you're involved in communal work, I'm involved in communal work, many of the people watching are involved in communal work, you need to see success. So do you set yourself goals or, a measuring, a yardstick to be able to measure so you can look back and say, well, look what I've achieved? How do you keep going and keep driving yourself forwards when the work is endless? I know but how do you keep going?
So first of all, absolutely. I think no credible organization can do the work they do without setting goals and meeting and hopefully exceeding those goals. So in each program that we do, we set goals. In the Leadership Institute, for example, we take these 15 to 20 leaders through a course, and the formal course is only about 3 months. But we tell them when they join that welcome to this 3-month course, which you may not know it today, but is really at least 5 years, if not a lifelong course. And we measure our success based on when they come back. If they, after they've been through our course, themselves take on a project to better society. And we have a full-time staff working with them to develop projects in their own spheres of influence. Again, a journalist to write articles on something, a director general in a ministry to implement a new project, a mayor to change something in their city. And we measure our success based on how many of the participants actually go and do something. And then again, whether it's a one-time thing or something that is more systematic and systemic, but all judged through, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but the late Rabbi Sachs, who was, such a great person, and again, one of these crazy things that kind of just glossed by over the last few months because of all the pandemic-related things. But we in Israel, in Israel, he's a less known commodity than he is around the diaspora Jewish world. We've taken every single one of our leadership groups to London to sit with him and to meet with him. And some of these leaders, especially the secular ones, come out of it and saying, I've searched for a rabbi my whole life, and I had to come all the way to London to find my rabbi. One in particular is a dean of a law school here in Israel and a radio anchor. He wrote in one of the major newspapers here in Israel exactly that, subsequent to Rabbi Sachs's passing. And Rabbi Sachs, who was a patron of Gesher, by the way, he was an honorary patron of the organization, had an incredible line, and I'm sure you've heard it, but it's worth repeating, where he said that I don't need you to agree with me, but I need you to care about me. And I think if we measure success by how we all care about the other, especially those with whom we don't agree, I think we can really assess whether or not we've been successful or not. And that's something that we do regularly, every single day.
Absolutely, JJ. It's interesting that, the section of the Talmud, you'll be familiar with it, that at the end of the time, all the different righteous people will be dancing in a circle. All the different colors, shapes, and stripes will be dancing. And the Almighty will be in the middle. And the message is, it doesn't really matter, whether you are of this persuasion or that persuasion, as long as what is in the middle of your life is of significance and of importance. And that, of course, is faith. And I think the idea of the loving of what we have in common and respecting the differences rather than just tolerating the differences is, for me, one of the key things, which I think, we've been told time and again, we put up, we putting up doesn't get us anywhere. No. There's got to be that respect and a love. What do you think?
The song Kol HaOlam Kulo, Gesher Tsar Ma'od, was written actually for a Gesher seminar by Baruch Shait in the early 70s. It became popular during the Yom Kippur War, but it was written for a Gesher seminar. But the end of it, I think, is really key. V'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. We can't afford to be fearful. We have to charge forward, even if the bridge is down, because we can't afford to be scared.
Agreed. We've got a question that's come in from Fred Green. I don't know if you can see it. The question is, how do the upcoming Israeli elections affect your work with the different sectors in Israeli society?
That's a great question, Fred. I'm happy he stayed up to listen to me tonight. I'll even go before the actual elections. Maybe this isn't a great joke, but somebody said that, over the last few years, the need for Gesher has kind of not been as apparent. So I arranged a few election seasons to kind of raise the. That's what happens during elections. Look, the pandemic has made it hard. The elections have made it hard, and unfortunately, the climate of elections over these last number of years around the world has been so disgusting that it just makes our work harder and more challenging, but so much more necessary. And I think we all need to recognize that there's a day after the elections, even in Israel, even after the 4th and 5th round, there's a day after. We all have to live here together. So, I think that would be my answer to Fred, and I look forward to sharing with him even in person, maybe even later tonight.
Okay, very nice. Any last questions you can put in the comment box now. So, JJ, we've spoken about your past, we've spoken about your present. Outside of Gesher, where do you have aspirations in terms of your political career? Could Gesher ever be a springboard to becoming a a politician, dare I say it? I mean, everyone else is in politics. Why
Well,
not you?
I think I reached the height of my political career when I had Rabbi Penny Hackenbrock call me the mayor of Gush.
I
Although
know.
Fred Green might call me the vice mayor of Modi'in, I'm afraid. But no, I don't have any political aspirations. I think I'm content with just remaining JJ Sussman of Modi'in, who works at Gesher. But again, I think the future is at Gesher. I can talk about the future at Gesher. We just signed a joint venture project with the Israeli government to work on educating Israelis on diaspora Jews, not just
Right.
to have Israelis become aware of diaspora Jewish communities, again, going back to the ignorance, but even more than that, to develop a sense of responsibility to Jews around the world. Because again, we're not that many people around the world, and I think we all need to recognize what it means to be the state of the Jewish people. And those Jewish people, we're not in a prism of only 72 years of history. We here need to expand that prism to 3,000 years of Jewish history, and we're just another chain in that link. So my hope for the future is to give over that chain and that link and that tradition to my children, and hopefully they'll be able to continue to pass it on to their children as well.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I have to tell you one final anecdote.
That was a good answer for a politician, right? I didn't really answer the question.
It's growing on you. I can see it. Another few minutes and you'll start the party. I was in Auschwitz the last day that before they closed.
Well, ending on a good note here.
Yeah, I know it will be. They closed Auschwitz in Poland because of COVID, and I was there literally the last hour. And there was a group from Israelis, and there were a group of Israelis which were secular and a group which were religious. And what was fascinating is that in that place of such darkness, that's where gradually they were prepared to actually start talking to one another. But the idea, of course, is that it shouldn't take anti-Semitism or worse. You have to find and seek what we have in common. Any last thoughts or a last message for your fans and for the community around the world? We're one community. JJ.
Well, let me just, I didn't prepare any last words, but all I can say is that the community of Woodside Park is blessed to have such a dynamic, innovative rabbi. I think I shared that in my Facebook post, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit about the work that we're doing and to spread positivity during these times of doom and gloom. I think we're in such a doomy and gloomy place that we can only be optimistic about the future. And I think the more we can do to hasten its arrival, the better it will be for all of us. And I think with leaders such as you, Rabbi Hackenbrock, the future is incredibly bright.
We'd like to thank JJ Sussman on behalf of the Woodside Park community and all of those that have joined us this evening and will be joining us in the coming days to play catch up on our YouTube channel. JJ, it's been absolutely fascinating. A voice of reason and moderation, a voice which is so necessary in this when we find that there are factions and fractions. And please God, we wish you, together with your beautiful family and Eliza, bracha v'atzlacha b'chol ma'asecha. You should go from strength to strength, and we look forward. Here's an open invitation to come to the Woodside Park community and look forward to you addressing us in the not too distant future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you again to JJ.
Thank you very much.